morning, good day, good evening, good night, wherever you're dialing in from. Appreciate you dialing in for another one of our videos talking about a person in the Bible. A lot of times, we look at the people in the Bible. A lot of times they give us inspiration. They give us examples of faith, examples of, of duty to God and leadership and those kind of things. But every now and then we have someone as a cautionary tale as well. And that's what we're looking at today with Achan. Achan was part of Joshua's army, and we find what he did in the Bible. As we look at the chapters 6, 7, and 8, we get a complete picture of what's going on. I felt the need to cover what Achan did simply because the lesson in our focus group kind of glossed over. I didn't think it went into depth in regards to what Achan did. And I felt the need that we should talk a little bit more about it. So I want to make this short video for that. Now, I'll start off with, this is very cursory, I should say. I didn't want to get too much into the weeds. But then again, there's not a lot to say outside of the book of Joshua. Historically, archaeologically, there's a lot to back up the events of the Bible, as I've repeatedly said. But in regards to this situation, we have the book of Joshua. And that's pretty much it, right? And we have rabbinic oral traditions that were passed down and then later were written down. And we'll get in those shortly. So when we look at this, Achan was an Israelite, of course. He was in the tribe of Judah. And he was part of Joshua's army in the book of Joshua. He disobeyed God, right? So to put it simple, okay? So now the background of this, let's look at this. So we look at the book of Joshua. Chapter 6 deals with, of course, the fall of Jericho, okay? And with the fall of Jericho, God tells the Israelites through Joshua to take nothing from Jericho at all, right? They were not to take any silver, no gold, no livestock, no linen, no nothing. That belonged to the Lord. It's first fruits. It belonged to the Lord. Everything else, he would instruct them to keep, but when it came to those things in Jericho, God said, you are forbidden to take any of that stuff. Okay. So they sacked Jericho. And of course they saved Rahab and her family, Rahab, I should say, and her family. Another story altogether. And then they went on in chapter 7, we see now at the end of, at the beginning of 7, we see that the sin is revealed, okay, leading into the next city that they were going to sack. The messengers came back to Joshua and stated, hey, this city over here, the city of Ai, is very small. We just need a handful of people, a few thousand. Go over there, we knock it out, we'll be done. Joshua says, okay, cool. We'll go take a few thousand. They take a few thousand, they come back, and they were defeated, right? The people of Ai drove them back. And they lost 29 people. The lives were lost. Joshua was very upset, right? He went to God and said, "Well, wait a minute. Why did we lose? Why did we completely destroy this huge city of, Jericho, only for us to lose to this smaller city, Ai?" And he's like, why did you bring us this far only to abandon us, right? Joshua, of course, was not aware of what Achan had done. And so God revealed, hey, someone did something they weren't supposed to do. And since that sin has entered into this agreement, I'm not going to be a part of what you're doing until the matter is set straight. Okay, so, and we see that. Now, in chapter 7, we also see the steps that are taken to reveal who that person was. It went first to which tribe, and then it went into which clan, it went to which family, and from there it was discovered that Achan was the one. And Joshua did that using the priest stones, and it was revealed that way. Now, keep in mind, this is done in front of the entire nation. The whole entire nation had to be consecrated before they gathered in the presence of the Lord. So Achan had plenty of opportunities up until the time that he was revealed to say, hey, Joshua, it was me. I confessed before the Lord. But he didn't. He confessed when he finally got to him. Now, keep in mind, the whole nation were seeing this, so Achan had to see what was coming. And that guilt of sin had to be a burden to him, but he never came forward until it was revealed that he was the one that did that. Now, what was his sin? His sin was uh, that he took a Babylonian robe or scarf, and he took it was a Babylonian garment, and he took 200 shekels of silver and a gold bar. Right. So when they were sacking Jericho, he saw, he coveted, and he took. And that's how sin works, right? In that order. And he took those things and then took them back to his tent, and he buried them there under his tent. So, of course, God see this and knew this, and it violated the covenant that God made with his people, right? All right. So now it was discovered. And then whenever Joshua said, hey, give praise to God and then confess your sin, tell me all of it and leave nothing out, right? And of course, he done just that. Well, once he's done that, he confessed. Joshua sent some people to Achan's tent. They discovered what was stolen. They brought it back and laid it before the Israelites and before the Lord, and it was discovered. Achan's sin was discovered, and it was exposed. Okay. So, as a result of this, Achan and his family and his livestock and everything that he had owned was taken to the valley of Achor, and from there, they stoned they stoned them all and burned everything. Right. So, and then they heaped stones on top of the family and all of their possessions, and that way the sin was absolved. And then we see in chapter 8 that now that everything was set right, then they continued on with the conquest of the whole of the promised land. Okay, so but right now we're looking at what went on with Achan, right? So the consequences, the reason why Achan, his disobedience had immediate repercussions. Okay, it wasn't one of these things that God said later on, "Hey guys, this is what was done." No, it happened in the moment. It happened right there, because God knew that if they didn't get this squared away now, that there's no telling who else would, also be tempted in regards to, because they're going to see a lot of gold, silver, garments, linens. They're going to see women. They're going to see slaves. They're going to see pagan idolatry. They're going to see some crazy stuff throughout the conquest of the land that was promised to Abraham, right? So, knowing this, if God did not address this sin right away, it would continue to be an ongoing and bigger, a problem, a sin that would keep occurring among the people. So it was very important that this was taken care of right away, not later on. So, so that was where it's come from. Of course, they took care of that and took him to the Valley of Acre where they stoned him and all those things. But it's very, that's the gist of it in regards to what Achan had done. Achan's sin was it wasn't just his sin, and God could have easily went to Joshua before the kingdom of before going to the city of Ai and say, hey, you need to take care of this. Well, yeah, he could have done that, but the point here is that it needed to be seen, it needed to be addressed, because this covenant that and what God was doing with his people in regards to seizing the promised land, it was a national covenant to God. Okay, so that's the part that's very important, that his sin affected everyone, right? Very important stuff. So that's the gist of it in the Bible. And of course, I would tell you, look thoroughly at Joshua chapter 6, 7, and 8 to get a very a clear view of the story. Of course, I'm just giving the Cliff Note version, the paraphrasing some of that. So there's a lot to learn from those chapters in regards to how we use it as well. Now, we look at rabbinic literature. Of course, now rabbinic teachings were oral traditions for a long time, and then they were put down into writing. And a lot of the rabbinic Jewish scholars believed it was only Achan that got stoned and not his family. His family, of course, had to watch that happen. And of course, the children were accessories to the crime because they kept silent. So on one hand, some of them believed that Achan was the only one that was stoned. Others believed everybody was stoned. Okay, now some others apparently believe that um, when compared to the Bible, that the crime was a little bit more exaggerated than what is written. It says that they state in the scholarly writings and the rabbinic literature that Achan has seen an idol endowed with magical powers, with a tongue of gold and silver presence before it. Taking the idol, he caused the death 36 righteous men of Israel, members of the high court. So these weren't just men, which on its face, I don't believe that, because one, the Bible didn't say it. And two, common sense, you know that the elders in the high court would never be the first ones in the battle, right? They're always going to send someone else's sons or their own sons to fight for them, because the youth are going to be strong, vigorous, and they're going to be ones that do all the fighting. Elders are not going to do that, right? So that's where I kind of part from there. So when we look at this, of course, now the death, of course, the death to Achan not only was for the literature that we come across said the reason for Achan's death had mostly to do the death of the members of the high court. And that's false, because the sin wasn't against anybody but against God. And so that alone is reason for death. Sin is death. Okay. So I think they get that wrong in that regard. It wasn't, blood for blood. This was a sin against God, because he put that provision in place. He told them not to do it. And Achan did just opposite. Now, another viewpoint was talking more about that, said that there was more to it than that, of course, because the way he admitted, thus and thus I have done, in the translation, that there was more than that was done. But the Bible states the three things that were taken: the garment, the silver, and the gold. And it doesn't matter even if it was just the garment. Okay, it could have been 10 other things. It doesn't matter. Bottom line is, he took something that belonged to God, and you don't do that. Bottom line. All right, so now just to kind of look at some of the areas where I think that, looking at my notes, that I think that the significance and what do you and I take away from this is real simple. Okay, when God calls us to be holy and obedience, we got to do that. Right? Plain and simple. Individual sin can harm an entire community, which it did here, right? It kind of, God withdrew his favor from his people, and by doing so, they had no protection and no provision. God didn't help them like he did with Jericho, and the results were astounding. They were complete opposite from what they seen with Jericho, right? So in the same thing, we can look at sin within a congregation. Our sin can weigh down what God's trying to do in our communities and in our churches. So it's very important that we try to live a Christian life and continue to work on that sanctification, more of Christ and less of us, and just reveal ourselves to each other, our Christian family, right? And help one another with sin. Divine justice, we look at that. The event reiterates God's sovereignty and righteousness, his decree, and clearly forbidden taking the spoils. Death to punishment aligns with the severity of violating a holy command. Yeah, this wasn't just a commandment. This was divine justice against a divine commandment. He was told not to do it, right? Of course, God could easily go back and say, each one of you every day violated something of the 10 commandments. But in this case, God was with them. He told them what to do, and this man didn't do it. Human responsibility. Achan's confession reveals that through sins beget that though sin begins as secret, ultimately comes to light. Personal accountability is highlighted, underscoring that all deeds are ultimately laid bare before God. Yeah, we can't hide our sin. Eventually, one way or another, it is exposed. That's the problem, and that's the thing we have to realize. What we do in our lives, even in secrets, will be exposed because it will be detriment. Sin is detriment to anything God's trying to do. Sin and God is not going to reside in the same place. And we have to be conscious of that. God hates sin, and he does everything he can to drive sin away. And he's done that through the cross. That's where we find we seek shelter from sin. And of course, the covenant context, Israel's covenant with God demanded corporate purity. God's presence was contingent among both individuals and the nation, abiding by his instructions. Yeah, that's what it's all about, right? He was there among his people, and they had to be consecrated before battle. And they had to listen to what he said. It was real simple. Take nothing for yourselves. It's real simple. They didn't have to do it. Why? Because again, that belonged to God. That first plunder, that belonged to God. Now, he could tell you not to take anything at all from here on out, because here's the bottom line. Don't focus on the plunder, because that was small compared to the promise, which was generational and it was historical. They were giving a nation. They were given land to build their nation. Wow. Don't focus on the plunder. He wanted them to focus on the promise. And so one person showed how they can put a cog in that, really mess things up real quick. Now we're looking at this for we look at this in regards to how do we apply this situation in our lives. Well, we got to keep in mind hidden sin disrupts community harmony. Yes, it does. It does that very much. We always sometimes talk about how the sin can be so stark and prevalent from the pulpit when a pastor is caught sinning. But you know what? Deacons are in the same light. Fellow members of the church are in the same light. We can't be hypocritical. We can't be, we can't come in here, pretend to be one thing and be something else. We just can't. And it holds back God's plan for us and his community and his church. Spiritual leadership bears responsibility confronting wrongdoing for the collective well-being. Yeah. So if I'm out lollygagging, doing drugs, drinking, and womanizing, and my church doesn't do anything about it, that's a problem, because my witness is totally shot. And if people see me coming to church and professing Jesus Christ, but at the same time they see me doing these other things that are contrary to God, that's a problem. It is a stumbling block in regards to what God wants done in his church. Okay. Thankfully, by the cross and the new covenant, I would not be stoned. Well, who knows? Some people at Webb wouldn't mind doing the stoning. So, kidding, but maybe not. But the bottom line is, I could easily be, any one of us could be a stumbling block to a corporate problem, to a corporate entity such as the church by our bad witness. Genuine repentance provides a pathway to restoration, although it does not necessarily negate the consequences of wrongdoing. We got to confess those sins. But, again, I want to point out that Achan saw what was coming as it was, going from tribe into clan into, the families, and he saw what was coming, but he waited until it was too late, and he had to point out. He had plenty of opportunity to confess his sin, and he didn't. Now, if he came to Joshua right away and confessed, there's no telling what the outcome could have been. God could have we don't know. The bottom line is, what we do know is he waited until he was caught, and then he confessed. Now, summarize the legacy. We look at this again. I look at Achan as a cautionary tale of disobedience that affects the entire operation and plans that God would have. Right? God could easily have a plan for a church in regards to missionary work, missions-minded work, community-minded. But if any one of us are, just being sinful in some aspect, it could just ruin the whole plan, right? And we always look at the pastor as being the focal point. Well, that could also be us deacons. It could be us teachers. It could be any one of us. It could be anybody in the pew. we take on a corporate responsibility in regards to missions or taking up offerings or taking on the responsibility in regards to children or whatever the case may be, that plan, we probably won't see fruit of it because it could be something that we are doing individually. And that does affect the kingdom of God corporately, so to speak. And we got to be mindful of that. We got to understand that sin is not something to play with. It's not trivial. Sin leads to death. It just does. And we see here how that tragedy of Achan emphasizes that. Sin is corrupt, sin is bad, and sin can ruin more than just your own life. It can ruin others as well. It's a very bad thing. So again, a cautionary tale. That's about all I want to cover in regards to that. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about what the deal was with Achan in regards to that, because I felt that our lesson didn't really cover much of it. So anyway, there it is. All right. Appreciate you watching the video. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below the video. I'd love to hear what you got to say. Bring your input. If you got anything more that you want to add to it, love to hear what you got to say. Like and comment, subscribe to the channel. That way, every time we post a video, you'll be notified when those videos post. Okay? Till next time, take care. God bless.